He packed his designer bags on a Tuesday, leaving behind a 15-year marriage for a 22-year-old runway model he had met at a corporate charity gala just 3 weeks prior. His parting words to his wife were as cold as polished marble. "You're simply not the caliber of woman I need by my side anymore. You're the past." He walked out the door believing he was leaving her with nothing but a shattered heart, a modest settlement, and the fading memories of their youth. He thought he had outgrown her. But Jenny Sterling had no earthly idea that the quiet, unassuming woman he had just ruthlessly discarded was the actual, unrecognized architect of his entire empire. And while he was busy drowning in expensive champagne, vanity, and a new, glamorous lifestyle, fate was quietly preparing a billion-dollar twist that would ultimately bring him crashing to his knees. The Sterling Innovations Winter Gala was a spectacle of excessive wealth, a glittering monument to Jenny Sterling's ego. Held at the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan, the ballroom was dripping in imported white orchids and illuminated by chandeliers that cost more than the average American home. Jake Sterling stood near the periphery of the room, nursing a glass of sparkling water, her plain but elegant midnight blue gown starkly contrasting with the sea of sequins and plunging necklines around her. She watched her husband holding court near the ice sculpture. Jenny was 42 but possessed the aggressively maintained physique of a man 10 years younger, his silver fox hair perfectly coiffed, his tailored Italian tuxedo hugging his broad shoulders. He was laughing loudly, a sound that used to fill Jake with warmth, but now only triggered a dull ache behind her eyes. He was charming the board members, the investors, and the press, effortlessly taking credit for the groundbreaking data compression software that had just propelled their company's valuation to a staggering $3 billion. No one in that ballroom knew that the foundational code for that software had been written by Jake, sitting cross-legged on a stained mattress in their cramped Boston apartment 15 years ago, while Jenny was out failing at his third sales job. She had been the genius. He had been the face. And over the years, the face had slowly convinced itself that it was the brain. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else, Jake," a voice murmured beside her. It was Beatrice Hall, Jake's oldest friend, and one of the most feared corporate litigators in the city. Jake offered a tired, strained smile. "I'm just not built for the spotlight, Bea. You know that. Jenny thrives on this. I just want to go home, take off these heels and read." "He's been looking at her all night, you know," Beatrice said softly, her sharp eyes darting toward the center of the room. Jake followed Beatrice's gaze. Standing just a few feet away from Jenny was Savannah Croft. She was 22, a rising star in the high-fashion world with legs that seemed to go on forever, cascading platinum blonde hair, and a smile that looked both angelic and predatory. Savannah was draped in a backless crimson dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. And Beatrice was right. Jenny's eyes kept drifting back to her, lingering on the curve of her spine, sharing secret, knowing smirks across the crowded room. "She's the new brand ambassador for the lifestyle division," Jake said, trying to keep her voice steady, though a cold knot was forming in her stomach. "It's just business." "Jake, please," Beatrice sighed, gripping her friend's arm. "Don't play the naive wife. You're too smart for that." The knot in Jake's stomach tightened. She excused herself, feeling suddenly claustrophobic, and made her way toward the private VIP suites on the mezzanine level, seeking a few minutes of quiet. As she walked down the heavily carpeted hallway, the thumping bass of the ballroom faded into a muffled hum. She approached the suite Jenny had reserved for private meetings. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. Jake pushed it open, expecting to find an empty room where she could catch her breath. Instead, she found the end of her life as she knew it. Jenny had Savannah pressed against the mahogany conference table. The model's hands were tangled in Jenny's perfectly styled hair, and they were kissing with a desperate, frantic energy that knocked a crystal decanter onto the floor, shattering it into pieces. Jake froze. The air left her lungs in a painful rush. The sound of the breaking glass caused Jenny to snap his head around. For a fraction of a second, Jake expected to see panic, guilt, or at least shock on her husband's face. Instead, Jenny simply straightened his tie, his expression hardening into an icy mask of annoyance. Savannah didn't even bother to look embarrassed. She offered Jake a lazy, triumphant smirk and reached for her glass of champagne. "Jenny?" Jake whispered, her voice trembling. "Close the door, Jake," Jenny commanded, his tone devoid of any warmth. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," she repeated, the shock slowly melting into a blinding, searing pain. You are with her. Here, while our friends and colleagues are right downstairs." "Let's not do the hysterical wife routine," Jenny sighed, stepping away from the table and smoothing down his lapels. "It's undignified. Savannah, darling, give us a moment." Savannah picked up her designer clutch, trailing her manicured fingers lightly across Jenny's chest as she walked past him. She paused at the door, looking Jake up and down with blatant pity. "He told me you were drab, but honestly, I expected more of a fight," she whispered, before slipping out into the hallway. Jake felt the room spin. "How long?" she demanded, tears finally breaching the dam and spilling down her cheeks. "6 months," Jenny said flatly, pouring himself a drink from a secondary bottle on the bar cart. He didn't look at her. "And honestly, Jake, it's a relief that you finally know. I was getting exhausted, trying to keep up the charade." "The charade? We've been married for 15 years, Jenny. We built this life together." "No, Jake," Jenny snapped, finally turning to face her, his eyes blazing with arrogant defiance. "I built this life. I made the deals. I shook the hands. I charmed the investors. You sat behind a computer screen in the dark. Don't confuse your clerical work with my vision. I am a billionaire CEO. You are a shut-in who still wears cardigans from a decade ago." The cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. The man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed her own potential for, was looking at her as if she were a piece of garbage he had accidentally stepped on. "I want a divorce," Jenny stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "I've already had Kelsey draw up the preliminary papers. I'm moving Savannah into the penthouse tomorrow. I expect you to be packed and gone by the end of the weekend." "The penthouse?" Jake gasped, her legs giving out as she sank into a leather armchair. "That's my home. I decorated every inch of it. It's corporate property, Jake, and as of yesterday, you are no longer affiliated with Sterling Innovations. You're fired. I'll see you in court." He walked past her, the scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the air like a toxin, leaving Jake alone in the shattered remains of her marriage. The next 48 hours were a blur of trauma, legal jargon, and profound humiliation. Jake retreated to the sprawling, 3-story Manhattan penthouse that she had spent years turning into a sanctuary. She walked through the rooms like a ghost, tracing the edges of the custom furniture, looking at the art they had bought together in Paris, feeling as though she had been thrust into an alternate reality. Her peace was violently interrupted on Thursday morning, when Kelsey Pendleton, Jenny's ruthless bulldog of an attorney, arrived at the door accompanied by 2 private security guards. Kelsey was a short, balding man with a penchant for flashy suits and a smile that never quite reached his cold, dead eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," Kelsey said, barely waiting for her to step aside before walking into the foyer. He handed her a thick manila folder. "I'm here to formally serve you. Furthermore, I am here to oversee your exit from the premises." Jake, dressed in sweatpants and an oversized sweater, stared at the folder. "My exit?" "Jenny gave me until the weekend." "Plans change," Kelsey smiled thinly. "Mr. Sterling and Miss Croft are returning from a brief trip to St. Bart's this evening, and Miss Croft wishes to begin redecorating immediately. Security is here to ensure you only take personal items. No art, no electronics, no furniture, only clothing and personal jewelry." "This is my home," Jake said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and profound grief. "You can't just throw me out on the street." "Actually, we can," Kelsey replied, opening his briefcase and pulling out a document that made Jake's blood run cold. It was the post-nuptial agreement. 3 years ago, when Sterling Innovations was facing a massive, frivolous lawsuit from a competitor, Jenny had come to her in a panic. He told her that if the company lost, their personal assets could be seized. He begged her to sign a post-nuptial agreement, claiming it was a complex legal maneuver purely designed to protect their home and her personal wealth by transferring the bulk of the assets into a shielded corporate trust under his sole control. He had kissed her forehead, told her he loved her, and said it was just paperwork. She had trusted him implicitly. She hadn't even had her own lawyer read it. "As you can see, Section 4, Paragraph B," Kelsey pointed with a manicured finger. "You waived your right to alimony, spousal support, and any claim to the primary residence, secondary residences, and all corporate holdings. In the event of a divorce, you are entitled to a one-time payout of $500,000. That's it. $500,000. To the average person, it was a windfall, but Jenny was worth over $3 billion. Jake had built the foundational technology that made that valuation possible, and now she was being legally robbed of her life's work and discarded like trash. "He planned this," Jake whispered, the horrifying realization washing over her. "He planned this 3 years ago." Kelsey merely shrugged. "Mr. Sterling is a visionary. He looks ahead. Now please, start packing. The guards will supervise." By 3 p.m., Jake found herself standing on the sidewalk in the freezing New York wind, flanked by 4 suitcases containing 15 years of her life. She had nowhere to go. She pulled out her phone and dialed the only person she could trust. Beatrice Hall arrived 20 minutes later in a sleek black town car. When she saw Jake standing on the curb, shivering and broken, Beatrice's professional composure cracked. She threw her arms around her friend, ushering her into the warmth of the car. "I'm going to destroy him," Beatrice vowed, her voice vibrating with a lethal intensity as the car pulled away. "I am going to rip Kelsey Pendleton's license to shreds, and I am going to make Jenny bleed." They went to Beatrice's brownstone in Brooklyn. For the first week, Jake couldn't eat. She barely slept. She was tormented by the relentless news cycle and social media. Jenny hadn't just left her. He was parading Savannah around like a trophy. Magazines published glossy spreads of the new it couple. Savannah's Instagram was a daily torture device, showing the model posing in Jake's kitchen, wearing Jake's favorite vintage diamond necklace, which Jenny claimed he couldn't find when she was packing, and lounging on the yacht that Jake had named. But the deepest cut came when Beatrice forced Jake to sit down at a dining room table, spreading out the financial disclosures Kelsey had smugly sent over. "It's worse than we thought, Jake," Beatrice said gently, sliding a stack of bank statements toward her. "The post-nup is ironclad. It was drafted by a legal team that specializes in screwing over spouses. But that's not the worst part. Look at these transfers." Jake squinted at the numbers. Over the past 2 years, Jenny had been quietly siphoning millions of dollars out of their joint accounts and funneling them into offshore shell companies. He had been buying real estate in Savannah's name. He had drained the liquidity they had saved for their future. "He deliberately starved your personal accounts," Beatrice explained, her jaw clenched. "He wanted to make sure that when he finally pulled the trigger, you wouldn't have a war chest to fight him in court. He wants you to take the 500,000 and disappear because you can't afford a protracted legal battle." Jake stared at the papers. The man she had loved had not merely fallen out of love with her. He had executed a calculated, years-long psychological and financial assassination. He wanted her ruined. He wanted her powerless. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. Jake looked down at her hands. They were shaking. But as she stared at the damning evidence of Jenny's betrayal, the crushing weight of her depression began to shift. The sadness was burning away, leaving behind something hot, sharp, and terrifyingly clear. "I don't want the 500,000, Jake said quietly. Beatrice looked up, surprised. "Jake, you have to take something to survive while we figure out a loophole." "No," Jake repeated, her voice steadying. She raised her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, the spark of the brilliant architect, the woman who had coded a billion-dollar empire in the dark, returned. "If I take his settlement, I agree to his terms. I agree that I am nothing. He thinks I'm helpless without his money. He forgot who built the engine he's driving." Jake moved into a tiny two-bedroom apartment in Queens, a stark and brutal contrast to the sprawling penthouse she had called home. The radiators clanked violently in the night, and the subway rumbled beneath the floorboards every 20 minutes. But for Jake, the cramped space wasn't a prison. It was a war room. She used a small portion of her personal savings, money she had kept in a separate, forgotten account from before she married Jenny, to buy high-end servers, multiple monitors, and the fastest internet connection available. The second bedroom became a labyrinth of wires and glowing screens. During the chaos of her eviction, under the watchful eyes of Kelsey's security guards, Jake had managed to slip a seemingly innocuous item into her bag of old college textbooks, an outdated, heavy external hard drive. The guards had dismissed it as electronic junk. They didn't know that on that drive was the graveyard of sterling innovations. Years ago, while Jenny was focused on consumer data compression, Jake had been obsessed with predictive logistics. She had spent 3 years developing a complex, self-learning algorithmic engine designed to predict global supply chain disruptions before they happened. She called it Project Aegis. It could analyze weather patterns, geopolitical tensions, shipping manifests, and even social media sentiment to reroute global shipping lanes automatically, saving multinational corporations billions in lost time. When she had presented it to Jenny 5 years ago, he had scoffed. He was too short-sighted, too obsessed with flashy consumer tech that yielded immediate, easy profits. "It's too academic, Jake," he had sneered, tossing her thick binder of code architecture onto a pile of junk mail. "No one cares about cargo ships and warehouses. It's boring. Bury it." Because he deemed it worthless, he never patented it under Sterling Innovations. He never copyrighted the code. He never even looked at it again. Legally, the intellectual property belonged entirely to the creator. It belonged to Jake. Sitting in the dim light of her Queens apartment, clutching a mug of cheap instant coffee, Jake booted up the old drive. The code poured across her screens like the Matrix, beautiful, elegant, and flawless. The world had changed drastically in the 5 years since she had buried Aegis. Global supply chains were currently in absolute chaos. Pandemics, canal blockages, and trade wars had companies bleeding money. What was boring 5 years ago was now the holy grail of global commerce. For 3 weeks, Jake barely slept. She updated the code, integrating modern AI machine learning protocols, sharpening the algorithm until it was a lethal, hyper-efficient weapon. When she ran a simulation using historical data from the past 2 years, Aegis successfully predicted 94% of global shipping disruptions and offered alternative routes that would have saved an estimated $40 billion across the Fortune 500. She had a nuclear bomb on her hard drive. Now, she needed a launch pad. "I need a meeting with Nathaniel Reed," Jake told Beatrice over lunch at a noisy diner a few days later. Beatrice choked on her salad. "Nathaniel Reed? Jake, are you out of your mind? The man is a recluse. He's the most aggressive venture capitalist in the hemisphere. He eats tech founders for breakfast and uses their bones for toothpicks. Furthermore, he despises Jenny. They've been bitter rivals for a decade." "Exactly," Jake smiled, a cool, calculating expression that made Beatrice shiver. "He hates Jenny. Jenny is currently expanding Sterling Innovations into enterprise logistics, a sector he knows nothing about. I know Jenny's entire roadmap for the next 5 years. It's flawed, it's bloated, and it's going to fail. I want to give Nathaniel Reed the weapon to crush Jenny, and I want him to fund me to do it." It took Beatrice 2 weeks of calling in every favor she had in the legal and financial worlds, but she finally secured a 20-minute window with Nathaniel Reed. Reed's offices were located at the top of a monolithic black skyscraper in the financial district. Unlike Jenny's ostentatious, flashy headquarters, Reed's domain was minimalist, intimidating, and dead silent. Nathaniel Reed himself sat behind a massive slab of petrified wood that served as his desk. He was a man in his late 50s, gaunt with piercing hawk-like eyes, and a reputation for utter ruthlessness. "You have 18 minutes, Mrs. Sterling," Nathaniel said, not bothering to offer a handshake or a seat. "I took this meeting out of curiosity. Your husband is a peacock parading around in a suit, but he is currently dominating the market. And from what I hear, he tossed you out with the garbage. Why should I listen to the disgruntled ex-wife?" Jake didn't flinch. She walked calmly to the conference display, plugged in her secure drive, and brought up the interface for Aegis. "Because, Mr. Reed, the peacock didn't build the company." "I did," Jake said, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "I wrote the compression algorithm that made him rich, and while he is currently burning through capital to build a logistics network that will take him 5 years to optimize, I have already solved the problem." She initiated a live simulation on the massive screen. She pulled real-time data from global maritime databases, highlighting a developing storm system off the coast of Asia and a simultaneous labor strike at a port in Rotterdam. Within seconds, Aegis analyzed the dual threats, calculated the financial impact on 12 different industries, and immediately generated predictive rerouting models that bypassed the bottlenecks entirely. Nathaniel Reed sat up straight, his mocking demeanor vanishing instantly. The silence in the room was absolute as he watched the numbers crunch at a speed that defied logic. "You ran this on live data?" Reed demanded, standing up and walking slowly toward the screen, mesmerized. "The processing efficiency. It's unprecedented. How long have you been developing this?" "I started it 5 years ago. Jenny told me it was useless." Jake closed the laptop, letting the screen go black. She turned to face the billionaire. "Sterling Innovations is built on my past. This is the future. I am asking for $50 million in seed capital, a 20% equity stake for your firm, and complete autonomy over the board." Reed looked at her, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the woman standing before him. He saw past the modest clothing and the exhausted circles under her eyes. He saw a predator waking up. $50 million is a massive gamble on a solo founder who has been out of the game, Reed challenged, though the hunger in his voice betrayed his interest. It's not a gamble, Mr. Reed. It's an execution, Jake replied coldly. Jenny is funding his new logistics division using the company's core revenue. When Aegis goes to market, it will render his entire new division obsolete overnight. Sterling Innovations stock will plummet, and we will be there to pick up the pieces. A slow, terrifying smile spread across Nathaniel Reed's face. He walked back to his desk, picked up a heavy Montblanc pen, and opened a blank legal pad. Mrs. Sterling, Reed said softly, the thrill of the hunt lacing his words. I think you and I are going to be very, very good friends. Let's talk about the destruction of Jenny Sterling. For the next 18 months, Jake Sterling ceased to exist. In her place, C.L. Harrison, using her maiden name, emerged as the notoriously private, fiercely intelligent CEO of Aegis Dynamics. With Nathaniel Reed's $50 million seed investment, Jake didn't just rent an office, she built a fortress. Located on the 42nd floor of a sleek, glass-paneled tower in Hudson Yards, Aegis Dynamics operated with the secrecy of a military black ops unit. There were no flashy launch parties, no press releases, and no social media campaigns. Nathaniel insisted on a stealth mode operation. They were building a guillotine, and you didn't show the condemned the blade until their head was already on the block. Jake worked 90-hour weeks. The hesitant, soft-spoken woman who used to hide in the shadows of the Sterling Innovations ballroom was gone. She had traded her oversized cardigans and messy buns for sharply tailored Armani suits and a sleek, chin-length bob. The transformation wasn't a superficial attempt to compete with a 22-year-old model. It was the physical manifestation of a woman who had finally stepped into her own power. She was commanding a team of 60 elite software engineers, data scientists, and maritime logistics experts. Her first major strategic move was a quiet, ruthless poaching campaign. David Orris, the brilliant but chronically underappreciated lead systems architect at Sterling Innovations, was the first to defect. Jake met him at a dimly lit speakeasy in Tribeca one rainy Tuesday evening. David looked exhausted, nursing a bourbon with shaking hands. "It's a disaster over there, Jake," David confessed, rubbing his temples. "Jenny is pushing this new enterprise logistics platform, Sterling Vanguard. He's promised the board it will launch by Q3. But the core architecture is fundamentally flawed. He doesn't understand the algorithms, so he just keeps throwing more server power at bad code. It's bloated, it lags, and he's bleeding cash trying to market a product that barely works in beta." "And Savannah?" Jake asked, taking a slow sip of her Cabernet. David rolled his eyes. "She's the chief creative officer now. She spent $3 million redesigning the corporate lobby with imported Italian marble and a waterfall feature, while my team's development budget was slashed by 20%. Jenny is distracted. He's spending half his time in Saint-Tropez or buying race horses to keep her entertained. The board is getting restless." "Leave," Jake said simply, sliding a pristine, heavy stock envelope across the table. David opened it and stared at the offer letter inside. His eyes widened. "Jake, this base salary, this is double what Jenny pays me, plus equity?" "I know your worth, David. Jenny only knew how to exploit it," Jake replied, her voice calm and commanding. "I need an architect who can scale my predictive engine to handle 50 terabytes of live data a second. You start Monday, and bring your top 3 developers with you." Within a month, Jake had surgically extracted the top tier of Jenny's engineering department. Jenny, blinded by his own arrogance and obsessed with his new, highly publicized lifestyle, simply dismissed the resignations as trimming the fat. He hired cheaper, less experienced replacements, completely unaware that the brain trust of his company had just relocated 30 blocks away. While Aegis Dynamics built its weapon in the dark, Jenny and Savannah lived violently in the light. The tabloids documented their every move. There was a $20 million yacht christened the Savannah, a sprawling estate in the Hamptons purchased for $40 million in cash, and a seemingly endless stream of designer galas. But behind the glossy magazine covers, the golden cage was beginning to rust. Jenny sat in his cavernous, marble-clad office, staring furiously at a spreadsheet. The profit margins for Sterling Innovations' legacy consumer software, the very software Jake had built, were flattening. Competitors were catching up. To maintain the $3 billion valuation, the new logistics division, Vanguard, had to be a colossal success. It had to revolutionize the shipping industry. Mr. Sterling, his CFO, a nervous man named Gregory, stammered from the doorway. "We have a problem with the Vanguard beta test. Global maritime shipping just pulled out of the pilot program." Jenny's head snapped up, his jaw clenching. "What do you mean they pulled out? We gave them the software for free." "They said it was crashing their internal servers." Gregory swallowed hard. "The rerouting calculations took too long. They missed a crucial weather window in the Pacific and lost 2 days of transit time. They said the software is a liability." Jenny swept his arm across his mahogany desk, sending a crystal paperweight and a stack of files crashing to the floor. "Fix it! Tell the engineering team to fix the damn code." "Half the senior engineering team quit 6 months ago, Jenny," Gregory reminded him gently. "The new hires are struggling to understand the foundational architecture." Jenny sank into his leather chair, a cold bead of sweat trickling down his spine. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't have Jake in the back room to quietly rewrite the code and save him from his own technical ignorance. He was the captain of a massive ship, and he had absolutely no idea how the engine worked. At that exact moment, Savannah swept into the office, oblivious to the tension. She was wearing a custom Chanel suit, holding a tiny, shivering Pomeranian. "Jenny, darling, the interior designer needs an answer on the Aspen chalet. Are we going with the imported Swiss timber or the reclaimed barn wood?" Jenny looked at his young, beautiful fiancée. Suddenly, the glamour felt suffocating. "Not now, Savannah. I'm dealing with a crisis." She pouted, her angelic face twisting into a mask of petulant annoyance. "You promised we would finalize the Aspen house today. You're always working lately. It's boring." "It's boring," Jenny snapped, his voice rising. "This boring work is what pays for the yacht, the diamonds, and the dogs. I am trying to keep this company afloat." Savannah's eyes narrowed, the sweet facade dropping entirely. "Don't snap at me, Jenny. You promised me a lifestyle. If you can't deliver, there are plenty of men in this city who can." She turned on her heel and marched out, leaving Jenny alone with his failing software and a mounting sense of dread. The global unveiling of Sterling Vanguard was scheduled for the keynote presentation at the International Tech and Logistics Summit in San Francisco. It was the largest industry event of the year, packed with venture capitalists, tech journalists, and the CEOs of every major global supply chain conglomerate. Jenny had spent $5 million on the presentation alone, hiring Hollywood light technicians, a live orchestra for the opening, and securing the prime Friday morning speaking slot. He needed to dazzle the industry. He needed massive pre-sales to placate his increasingly hostile board of directors. On Thursday night, 24 hours before Jenny's keynote, Jake sat in a private, dimly lit booth at a high-end steakhouse just 3 blocks from the San Francisco Convention Center. Across from her sat Nathaniel Reed, swirling a glass of scotch, and Beatrice Hall, who had flown in to witness the culmination of their 18-month war. "The beta tests are complete," Jake said, sliding a sleek encrypted tablet across the table to Nathaniel. Aegis has been running live parallel simulations against the top 3 global shipping fleets for the past 90 days. We didn't just meet our projections, we exceeded them. We saved Oceanic Global an estimated $12 million in fuel and delay costs last month alone. Nathaniel glanced at the data, a predatory gleam in his dark eyes. Oceanic Global is ready to sign? Not just Oceanic, Jake smiled, a sharp, cold expression. Vertex Freight and the Pan-Asian Shipping Consortium have both signed letters of intent. They are ditching their legacy systems. They want Aegis. Brilliant, Beatrice murmured, raising her glass. Jenny is walking onto that stage tomorrow morning to sell a rusty bicycle to an audience that is about to be offered a Ferrari. When do we drop the press release? Jake asked, looking at Nathaniel. We don't just drop a press release, CL, Nathaniel said, using her new professional moniker. We drop a bomb. Tomorrow at 8 a.m., exactly 1 hour before Jenny takes the stage, I am formally announcing that Reed Capital is backing Aegis Dynamics with a Series A valuation of $1.2 billion. I will simultaneously release the endorsed case studies from Oceanic and Vertex. Jake felt a shiver run down her spine. The moment was here. The reckoning had arrived. Friday morning dawned crisp and clear over the San Francisco Bay. The convention center was buzzing with thousands of attendees. Jenny Sterling stood backstage, pacing nervously in a custom Tom Ford suit. He was sweating. The final patch for the Vanguard software had failed the night before. His lead engineer had warned him that if he ran a live demo on stage, there was a 40% chance the system would crash in front of the entire industry. He had to fake it. He would use a pre-recorded simulation video and pass it off as live data. 5 minutes to places, Mr. Sterling, a stage manager whispered. Jenny nodded, taking a deep breath and pasting his trademark, arrogant smile onto his face. He checked his phone, expecting a good luck text from Savannah. Instead, he saw 3 missed calls from Kelsey Pendleton, his lawyer, and 5 frantic texts from Gregory, his CFO. Frowning, Jenny dialed Gregory. The CFO answered on the first ring, sounding like he was hyperventilating. "Jenny, have you seen the news? Have you looked at the financial terminals?" Gregory shouted over the line. "No, I'm about to go on stage. What is it?" Jenny hissed, annoyed. "It's over, Jenny. The Vanguard launch is dead on arrival," Gregory stammered. Nathaniel Reed just held an impromptu press conference at the St. Regis. He announced a new logistics AI called Aegis Dynamics. It's exactly what we've been trying to build. But it actually works. Oceanic Global and Vertex Freight just publicly endorsed it. They announced they are signing exclusive contracts with Aegis. They won't even look at Vanguard now. The blood drained from Jenny's face. The convention center walls seemed to close in on him. Nathaniel Reed. How did he beat us to market? Who the hell is running Aegis Dynamics? They haven't announced the CEO's name yet, just that she's a visionary, Gregory said, his voice trembling. Jenny, our stock is already plummeting in pre-market trading. The board is calling an emergency meeting for Monday. They're talking about a vote of no confidence. "Stop panicking," Jenny barked, though his own heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Reed is bluffing. It's vaporware. I'll go out there, pitch Vanguard, and we'll buy Aegis out on Monday. Find out who this CEO is. Offer them whatever they want. 50 million. 100 million. Just acquire the damn code so we can absorb it." "Mr. Sterling, you're on," the stage manager interrupted, pointing to the curtain. Jenny shoved his phone into his pocket and walked out into the blinding stage lights. The applause from the massive auditorium was polite, but not thunderous. As he stepped to the podium, he looked out into the sea of faces. In the front row, sitting dead center, was Nathaniel Reed. The billionaire venture capitalist wasn't looking at his phone or taking notes. He was staring directly at Jenny, a terrifying, knowing smirk playing on his lips. Jenny's mouth went dry. He launched into his rehearsed pitch, but the energy in the room was completely dead. People were whispering, checking their phones, scrolling through the Aegis press release that was dominating the morning news cycle. When Jenny finally played his pre-recorded live simulation, it looked clunky and rudimentary compared to the staggering metrics Reed had just published. It was a bloodbath. When Jenny finished, there were no questions from the press about his software. The first journalist to stand up simply asked, "Mr. Sterling, how does Vanguard plan to compete with the predictive AI models just unveiled by Aegis Dynamics, which already has the backing of the top 3 global shipping firms?" Jenny completely froze. He mumbled a non-committal corporate platitude and practically fled the stage. Back in his hotel suite, the atmosphere was funereal. Kelsey Pendleton and Gregory were on a conference call, frantically trying to mitigate the disaster. Savannah was sitting on the velvet sofa, scrolling angrily through Instagram, completely disengaged from the financial collapse happening around her. "I got a meeting," Kelsey announced, muting the phone. He looked at Jenny, his usually cold eyes wide with shock. "I reached out to Reed Capital. They agreed to an emergency acquisition meeting at their local offices here in San Francisco at 3 p.m. But Jenny, they set the starting price at $500 million. In cash." Jenny collapsed into a chair, rubbing his face. "We don't have $500 million in liquid cash. We've burned too much on Vanguard, and on other things." He glanced resentfully at Savannah's massive diamond ring. "We can leverage the company's remaining assets," Kelsey said grimly. "If we don't buy Aegis, Sterling Innovations will be bankrupt in 2 years. This is a hostage negotiation, Jenny. You have to swallow your pride and grovel to whoever this Aegis CEO is. Beg them to take stock options instead of cash." At 2:55 p.m., Jenny and Kelsey walked into the ultra-modern, glass-walled boardroom of Reed Capital's San Francisco branch. Nathaniel Reed was already seated at the head of the long obsidian table, looking relaxed and immensely satisfied. "Nathaniel," Jenny said through gritted teeth, forcing a tight smile. "Congratulations on the launch. It was a hell of a PR stunt. Let's skip the posturing. I want to buy Aegis." "I know you do, Jenny," Nathaniel chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "But I don't own Aegis. I merely fund it. You'll have to negotiate with the majority shareholder and CEO." "Fine," Jenny snapped, impatient and humiliated. "Where is he?" The heavy oak doors at the back of the boardroom opened. The rhythmic click of designer heels echoed on the hardwood floor. "She is right here, Jenny," a voice said. Jenny spun around. Standing in the doorway, radiating absolute authority and dressed in an immaculate, razor-sharp charcoal suit, was Jake. She walked to the head of the table, pulling out the chair opposite Jenny. She didn't look like the broken, weeping woman he had discarded in a hotel suite 18 months ago. She looked like an executioner. Jenny's mouth fell open. He looked from Jake to Nathaniel, and then back to Jake, his brain completely short-circuited. "Jake? What are you doing here?" Jake sat down, folding her hands elegantly on the table. She looked at her ex-husband, taking in his pale, sweating face, his panicked eyes. For 18 months, she had dreamed of this exact moment. She thought she would feel rage or perhaps vindication. But looking at him now, stripped of his power and begging for salvation, she felt absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. "Hello, Jenny," Jake said, her voice smooth as glass. "I believe you wanted to discuss buying my company. But before we begin, I need to correct you on one thing." She leaned forward, locking eyes with the man who had tried to destroy her. "Aegis Dynamics is not for sale. I didn't bring you here to negotiate. I brought you here to watch you realize that you are finished. The silence in the Reed Capital boardroom was absolute. The ambient hum of the San Francisco traffic 40 stories below seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of Jenny Sterling's shallow, panicked breathing. He stared at his ex-wife, his mind violently rejecting the reality of the situation. Jake sat before him, perfectly composed, her gaze as sharp and unforgiving as cut glass. "This is a joke," Jenny finally stammered, looking frantically at Nathaniel Reed, then at his lawyer, Kelsey Pendleton. "This is some kind of corporate extortion. She's my ex-wife. She doesn't have the capital or the technical capability to build $1 billion AI infrastructure." "I built the infrastructure you're currently standing on, Jenny," Jake replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "You just never bothered to look at the blueprints. Aegis is the evolution of the predictive logistics engine I showed you 5 years ago. The one you called boring and told me to bury." Kelsey Pendleton, sensing the catastrophic legal implications, leaned forward, his usual smugness replaced by a sheen of cold sweat. "Mr. Reed, if this is true, then Mrs. Sterling developed this technology while married to my client. Under the terms of their post-nuptial agreement, any intellectual property developed during the marriage belongs to Sterling Innovations. We will file an injunction tomorrow morning and seize Aegis Dynamics." Nathaniel Reed burst into genuine, booming laughter. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a silver cigar tube, rolling it thoughtfully between his fingers. "Kelsey, you really are a spectacularly lazy lawyer," Beatrice Hall said, stepping into the boardroom from the adjoining office. She was carrying a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "You were so eager to protect Jenny's assets and screw over my client that you drafted the most aggressive, ironclad separation of property clause in New York state history." Beatrice tossed a copy of the post-nuptial agreement onto the obsidian table. It landed with a heavy thud in front of Kelsey. "Section 8, Paragraph C," Beatrice recited from memory, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Any and all intellectual property, patents or business entities formed by either party after the date of physical separation shall remain the sole and exclusive property of the creator, explicitly shielded from any claims by Sterling Innovations or its subsidiaries." "You wanted to make sure Jake couldn't touch your precious new ventures, Jenny. You built a fortress to keep her out. But you actually built a fortress to protect her from you." Jenny's face drained of color. He looked at Kelsey, who was frantically flipping through the document, his manicured finger trembling as it traced the lines of his own drafting. "Is it true?" Jenny hissed at his lawyer. The verbiage is unambiguous," Kelsey swallowed hard, refusing to meet Jenny's eyes. "Because you legally separated your assets and evicted her before she formally incorporated Aegis Dynamics, we have no claim to her company." "But that's not the best part." Jake leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Did you really think I just spent 18 months building a better product? No, Jenny. I spent 18 months building a trap." Jake tapped a sequence on her encrypted tablet. The massive screen at the end of the boardroom flared to life, displaying lines of highly complex, illuminated code alongside internal financial documents from Sterling Innovations. "When your engineering team panicked because Vanguard was failing, they started cutting corners," Jake explained, her tone analytical and merciless. 3 months ago, your lead developer integrated an open-source patch to try and fix your routing latency. But it wasn't open source. It was proprietary architecture patented by Aegis Dynamics. I seeded it through a proxy server, knowing your desperate, inexperienced team would steal it without doing their due diligence. Jenny gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "You set us up. I let you hang yourself. Jake corrected. Sterling Vanguard is built on stolen, patented Aegis code, which means your entire new division is illegal. Yesterday, Beatrice filed a multi-billion-dollar intellectual property theft lawsuit against Sterling Innovations in federal court. The SEC was notified this morning. By the time the opening bell rings on Wall Street on Monday, your stock will be suspended pending investigation. Jenny jumped up from his chair, knocking it backward onto the hardwood floor. You bitch! You're destroying the company. My company! It was never your company, Jake said, standing up to meet him, her presence filling the room. You were just the mascot, and the mascot's routine has gotten old. Jenny lunged forward, but Nathaniel Reed's private security detail materialized from the shadows, instantly stepping between them. Jenny stood there, chest heaving, his tailored suit suddenly looking like a clown's costume. He looked at Nathaniel, desperate for a lifeline. Nathaniel, please. We're businessmen. We can make a deal. I'll give you 50% of Sterling Innovations. Just pull the lawsuit. Nathaniel looked at Jenny with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. Sterling Innovations is dead, Jenny. It's a toxic asset. I wouldn't buy it for $1. You are currently standing in the headquarters of the new titan of industry. And she, he gestured to Jake, is the apex predator. Get out of my office. The weekend was a bloodbath. The news of the federal lawsuit and the SEC investigation broke on Bloomberg and CNBC by Sunday morning. Sterling Innovations' board of directors held an emergency, panicked Zoom call. When Jenny tried to log in, he found his access revoked. An hour later, Gregory, the CFO, called to inform him that the board had unanimously voted to terminate him as CEO with cause, stripping him of his golden parachute. Jenny returned to the $40 million Hamptons estate, seeking solace, only to find the gates wide open and a fleet of moving trucks in the driveway. He ran inside, his heart pounding in his throat. Savannah was standing in the grand foyer, surrounded by Louis Vuitton steamer trunks, directing 3 movers in Russian. She was wearing a massive sable coat and oversized Celine sunglasses. "Savannah, what are you doing?" Jenny shouted, his voice cracking. She lowered her sunglasses, looking at him as if he were a stranger who had accidentally wandered onto her property. "I'm leaving, Jenny. Obviously." "Leaving? Now? When I need you most, the board just ousted me." "I know," Savannah sighed, checking her diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch. "Kelsey called me. He said your assets are going to be frozen by Tuesday, and that you're likely facing bankruptcy because of the lawsuit. I'm a brand ambassador, Jenny. I can't be associated with a broke, disgraced fraud. It's bad for my image." "I left my wife for you," Jenny screamed, the sheer indignity of the situation finally breaking his carefully cultivated facade. "I bought you everything." "And I enjoyed it," Savannah smiled, completely devoid of empathy. "But the money is gone, and frankly, you've been incredibly stressed and boring lately. Alexander is waiting for me in the jet." "Alexander? Alexander Petrov," Jenny gasped, naming the Russian oligarch who had recently outbid him on a mega yacht. "He owns his own shipping fleet," Savannah purred, turning toward the door. "And apparently he just signed a very lucrative contract with a company called Aegis. He's in a great mood. Goodbye, Jenny. Don't lose the dogs." She swept out of the door, leaving Jenny standing completely alone in a cavernous, empty mansion that he could no longer afford, surrounded by the ghosts of his own hubris. 2 years later. The autumn air in Manhattan was crisp, but inside the sprawling penthouse suite of the Aegis Dynamics global headquarters in Hudson Yards, it was warm and buzzing with quiet efficiency. Jake Sterling, she had kept the name, letting her own success overwrite his legacy, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering skyline of the city that had once threatened to swallow her whole. She wore a sleek, tailored emerald pantsuit, holding a mug of artisanal coffee. On her massive minimalist desk sat the latest issue of Forbes magazine. Jake's face graced the cover. The headline read, "The Architect of the Future. How Jake Sterling Built a $50 billion Logistics Empire in the Dark." The twisting saga of Jenny's downfall had become Wall Street legend. The federal lawsuit had completely decimated Sterling Innovations. The company's stock dropped to pennies, forcing a liquidation of all corporate assets to pay off their mounting debts and legal fees. In a move of poetic, absolute dominance, Jake had used a fraction of Aegis Dynamics' quarterly profits to buy the bankrupt remains of Sterling Innovations at auction. She didn't buy it to run it. She bought it to dismantle it. She absorbed their patents, repurposed their server farms, and turned Jenny's opulent, marble-clad former headquarters into a subsidized coding academy for underprivileged young women. As for Jenny, the fallout had been apocalyptic. Beatrice Hall had taken him back to civil court, proving that the offshore accounts he had hidden during their divorce constituted massive financial fraud. The judge had invalidated the original post-nuptial agreement entirely, awarding Jake half of his hidden, remaining wealth. The legal fees, the SEC fines, and Savannah's extravagant unpaid credit card bills had drained the rest. The last Jake had heard, Jenny was living in a cramped, noisy one-bedroom apartment in New Jersey, working as a mid-level regional sales manager for a company that sold printer toner. The silver fox hair had thinned, the arrogant posture had crumbled, and the man who had once believed he was the center of the universe had faded into complete obscurity. "Knock, knock," Beatrice Hall said, poking her head into the office. She was holding a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon and 2 crystal flutes. The European Union just formally approved the Aegis contract for their entire continental rail network. Nathaniel is already opening the reserve scotch down the hall. Jake turned away from the window, a genuine, radiant smile breaking across her face. "That's brilliant, Bea. Let's celebrate." Beatrice poured the champagne, handing a glass to her oldest friend. She looked around the magnificent office, taking in the empire Jake had built from the ashes of her own heartbreak. "Do you ever think about him?" Beatrice asked softly, leaning against the edge of the desk. "Do you ever think about that night at the Pierre Hotel?" Jake took a slow sip of the champagne, the bubbles dancing on her tongue. She thought about the woman she used to be, the quiet, insecure ghost hiding in the background, shrinking herself so a mediocre man could feel tall. She thought about the devastating pain of being discarded and the freezing terror of standing on the sidewalk with nothing but her suitcases. "Sometimes," Jake admitted, her voice steady and clear, "but not with anger. I think about it with gratitude." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Gratitude?" "Yes," Jake smiled, looking back out at the vast, endless skyline of the city she had conquered. "Because if he hadn't been foolish enough to throw me away, I would have spent the rest of my life building his kingdom instead of discovering that I could rule the world all by myself." She clinked her glass against Beatrice's, the crisp sound ringing out like a victory bell in the silent, powerful heights of her own design. Fate had indeed prepared a billion-dollar twist, but Jake knew the truth. It wasn't fate that had built the empire. It was her. The saga of Jake Sterling is a testament to the fatal flaw of arrogance and the quiet, lethal power of underestimation. Jenny Sterling believed that wealth and status were born from loud charm and ruthless vanity, failing to realize that his entire empire was anchored by the silent brilliance of the woman he discarded. By severing her from his life, he didn't just lose a wife, he severed his connection to his own lifeblood. Jake's transformation from a dismissed, background figure into an unstoppable industry, Titan illustrates that true power doesn't need a spotlight to grow. It builds its foundation in the dark. Ultimately, the story serves as a thrilling reminder. Never mistake someone's quiet loyalty for weakness, because the architect you betray today might just be the one who engineers your total collapse tomorrow.